In the sweltering heat of June 1950, the world was abruptly reminded that peace in the atomic age was fragile, and that the Cold War could ignite into open fire. On the morning of June 25, columns of North Korean troops surged across the 38th parallel, their Soviet-supplied tanks grinding toward Seoul. Within hours, the fragile line that had divided North and South since the end of World War II was consumed by war. What followed would be a brutal clash of ideologies, armies, and nations, costing millions of lives, redrawing alliances, and etching scars that remain to this day. This was the Korean War, the first great armed struggle of the Cold War. The origins of the conflict lay in the collapse of the Japanese Empire in 1945. Korea, long under imperial rule, was suddenly liberated, only to be divided. The Allies, in a hasty decision, split the peninsula at the 38th parallel. Soviet troops administered the north, and American forces occupied the south. At first, this was meant to be temporary. But as the Cold War hardened, so too did the division. In Pyongyang, Kim Il-sung, a former guerrilla fighter, consolidated power with Moscow's blessing. In Seoul, Syngman Rhee, fiercely anti-communist, led a fragile government propped up by American aid. By 1949, both superpowers had withdrawn most of their troops, leaving behind rival Korean regimes, each claiming to be the rightful government of all Korea. The stage was set for confrontation. Border skirmishes grew more violent as both sides tested the other's resolve. Kim Il-sung, ambitious and confident, pressed Stalin and Mao for support in a full invasion. Soviet archives reveal Stalin's cautious approval in early 1950, provided Mao would commit to sending aid if needed. With the Chinese Communist victory over Chiang Kai-shek in 1949, the balance of power in East Asia shifted, emboldening the North. On the eve of war, Kim's army stood at nearly 200,000 men, trained and equipped with Soviet artillery, aircraft, and armor. When the invasion came, it was devastating. Seoul fell in just 3 days. Refugees clogged the roads south, carrying what little they could as the city burned. American military advisors in Korea radioed back grim reports. The South Korean army was collapsing. President Harry Truman, alarmed and determined to contain communism, ordered U.S. forces into action under the flag of the United Nations. On June 27, the Security Council, in the absence of a Soviet veto, passed a resolution condemning North Korea's aggression. By July, American divisions, many under strength and ill-prepared, were landing in Korea. The fighting quickly became desperate. The United Nations forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, were driven into a shrinking perimeter around the port city of Pusan. Known as the Pusan Perimeter, this line in the southeast was all that stood between North Korea and total victory. The summer of 1950 saw savage battles in the hills and rice paddies as outnumbered UN troops clung to their positions. American soldiers wrote of nights filled with flares and gunfire, of desperate bayonet charges, and of rivers choked with refugees. It was a slaughterhouse, recalled one veteran, yet the line held. Reinforcements and supplies poured in, and by August the North Korean advance had stalled. Then came a bold counterstroke. On September 15, 1950, MacArthur launched one of the most audacious amphibious assaults in military history at Incheon, a tidal port west of Seoul. Against the odds, UN forces stormed ashore, cutting the North Korean army in two. Seoul was recaptured by late September, and UN troops surged northward. By October, they crossed the 38th parallel, determined not just to repel aggression but to reunify Korea under the South. Pyongyang fell. Victory seemed near. But the war was about to take a darker turn. Mao Zedong, alarmed by UN forces approaching the Yalu River, the border with China, ordered his people's volunteer army into Korea. In late October, waves of Chinese troops poured across the mountains, striking with surprise and ferocity. The bitter Korean winter set in as UN forces reeled under the assault. At the Chosin Reservoir, U.S. Marines were surrounded by vastly superior numbers in sub-zero temperatures. "Retreat, hell," their commander declared. "We're just attacking in another direction." In a fighting withdrawal through snow and ice, the Marines broke free, but the momentum had shifted. By early 1951, Seoul had fallen once more. The war now settled into a bloody stalemate. For 2 more years, armies clashed along a shifting front near the 38th parallel. Trenches, barbed wire, and artillery barrages turned Korea into a battlefield reminiscent of World War I. The hills acquired grim names: Pork Chop Hill, Heartbreak Ridge, Bloody Ridge. Soldiers endured ceaseless shelling, mud, and frostbite. Civilians suffered horribly, millions displaced, countless villages destroyed. Napalm raids scorched valleys and towns, leaving haunting images of devastation. It was a total war on a small peninsula, yet it involved the world's greatest powers. Diplomatic efforts for peace dragged on as the fighting continued. Negotiations opened at Panmunjom in July 1951, but arguments over prisoner exchanges stalled progress. Meanwhile, the human toll mounted. By 1953, the war had killed an estimated 3 million people, including over 1 million civilians. Entire families were split across the border, a wound that never healed. The turning point came in March 1953 when Joseph Stalin's death altered the global balance. With Moscow more willing to compromise and both sides exhausted, momentum for peace grew. On July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. The front line became a fortified border, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, roughly following the 38th parallel. But no peace treaty was ever signed. Technically, the war never ended. The aftermath was profound. Korea lay in ruins, its cities shattered, its people traumatized. In the South, Syngman Rhee clung to power, backed by continued American military presence. In the North, Kim Il-sung emerged as a cult-like leader, rebuilding with Soviet and Chinese support. The Cold War had hardened. The U.S. forged military alliances across Asia, while China's entry into the war cemented its role as a communist superpower. For soldiers, the Korean War was often called the Forgotten War, overshadowed by World War II before it and Vietnam after. Yet its consequences were anything but forgotten. The legacy endures. The DMZ remains one of the most militarized borders on Earth, a stark reminder of unfinished war. Families remain divided decades later. For the United States, the war reshaped defense policy, committing American forces to permanent overseas deployments. For China, it was a moment of national pride, demonstrating its capacity to stand against Western power. And for Korea itself, it was a tragedy of division, one nation split in blood and iron. Today, when tensions rise on the peninsula, echoes of 1950 are never far away. The Korean War was more than a clash of armies. It was a crucible of the Cold War, where ideology and human lives collided on a grand scale. It showed the world the cost of global rivalry and the resilience of those caught in its path. This documentary was crafted with care, drawing on records, eyewitness accounts, and historical scholarship. If you value high-quality historical storytelling and want more untold chapters of the past brought vividly to life, we encourage your support. History matters, and together we keep its memory alive.